Acts chapter 23. Uh, I don't know if you can see. Well, of course you can see behind me. Things are going to get cluttered here for the next 20 days or so. Uh, if you're watching this as I post it, then I imagine most of you have read or heard that Debbie and I are leaving Oklahoma and moving back to Las Vegas at the end of January, and so things are going to be cluttered until we get that accomplished. Back to the text here. In chapter 23, we get this. To me, it's a story that it'd be really easy to put this into a script and make some kind of a movie or anyway. Paul does a very strategic thing by claiming as the Sanhedrin is gathered in the presence of the commander of the Roman detachment in Jerusalem. Paul makes the claim that he was on trial because he believes in the resurrection, which wildly divided the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And it became so chaotic and even violent that the commander feared that Paul was going to be torn to pieces, and so he had his soldiers get Paul and take him to the barracks. All right. Verse 11, the following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage, as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." I talked a little about this idea that the Lord stood near Paul. I'm going to come back to that. Now, I have friends who they keenly sense the presence of the Lord. I mean, from the way they talk about it, they have a sense of a physical presence with them. I have never had that. I don't deny that these people have it, or even that it's real. I think most people, anyway, in my experience, most people, when we have a sense of the presence of the Lord, it's not a physical thing. It's real, it's valid, but it's not physical. I blame it on the way I'm wired. I don't even know if that's the case, whether it's learned or whether it's just how I'm built by God. But I often struggle to sense the nearness of the Lord. I on one level, I hope you won't think less of me. On another level is, if you do think of less of me, then sorry. Not sorry. But for me, knowing that the Lord is near to me is strictly on the basis of faith. Now, at times, there's very real evidence of his closeness, but I only see that evidence in retrospect, it seems like. So what do we do? I mean, what do I do about the fact that I want to sense the Lord's closeness? And I truly believe he is close, even though I don't feel it, I don't sense it. What do I do with this? Because it feels like a dilemma to me. Okay, if I was my counselor, I would fall back on a technique that is useful in many, many applications. And it's the act as if concept. How would I act if I felt God's presence near me? What would that look like? What would that result in? Do the best I can to figure that out and then act in that way. Well, first of all, before you can act in that way, you kind of have to be able to see what would that look like. You have to think in terms of what would it look like for me to respond to what feels like a fact of the Lord's closeness. One of the things is I think I would act less impulsively. I posted up on Facebook that my New Year's resolution, I just have one, is less reacting, more responding. I would respond instead of reacting if I truly sensed the nearness of the Lord. What would happen to my anxiety? If it didn't go completely away, it would certainly go way down to the bottom. How would I treat? Well, let's start with how would I treat myself? I think I would treat myself with grace. Which doesn't mean everything's fine, I can just do any old thing. No, it means I treat myself with favor, unmerited, unearned favor, as God has treated me, which will result in a much higher desire, more intense desire to build my life by discovering and then observing God's design. Well, okay, I could go on, but the point is, my great challenge is to learn to act as if the Lord was near me. Well, I don't know if it even matters to you, but if it does, you can unpack that for yourself. And then what the Lord said was, take courage. Oh, I need that word. Take courage. I struggle. I think I've talked about this a bunch before, but I struggle with anxiety. I think I have for the first time I think I remember it was I was in like the 8th grade. But after my heart attack, it was way higher. It's as though my limbic system never gets fully at rest. Anyway, I struggle with anxiety, and really the best synonym for anxiety is fear. And one of the things that does is it makes me less confident about the future, and much more fearful of what might be out there. I've never heard God's voice. I've never heard him speak to me other than through Scripture, and occasionally through what others have spoken into my life, but I've not heard the Lord in the way that Paul heard him that night in the Jerusalem barracks. But if he did speak to me in that way, I think he would say the same thing. at least this first part. Take courage. How does one take courage? Well, it kind of goes back to the act as if thing, right? What does it look like to have courage? To take courage. See, this is not like I'm giving you courage. Big difference between here, take this courage, and, I'm giving it to you, as opposed to take courage. Jesus said to his disciples and other people, don't be afraid. That's similar to take courage. When do you most often need courage? Is there a pattern in your life where courage becomes essential? Well, all of us need courage. And some of us, as I've said, need to take courage in a more defined, discrete, intentional way. I have friends, a few friends, who courage just seems to come to them. They're not frightened people. They're not afraid. They're courageous. I wish I was that way. Take courage. And then the Lord kind of pulls back the curtain and says, as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. The difficulty here for Paul was how he was going to get to Rome was not as he had planned it, because I think he was already planning. This was in his big plan of getting to Rome. But God's plan was way not his plan. I know what that's like. I have a sense of how that works. In my life, anyway. I bet you do too. But Paul was going to get there. Well, there's several things about it. First of all, he was going to get there on the government's dime. He was going to have to go as a prisoner. And so if you're a prisoner, you have limited freedom. Duh. Okay. But he wouldn't have had to pay his way on what was a long journey to Rome. But and that would have been pretty cool. And he would have made it to Rome, one of his primary objectives. But here's the other part. He was going to get there not in a pretty simple and leisurely fashion. What was ahead for Paul, and God doesn't disclose this, but we're going to see it as we move through toward the end of the book of Acts, that this was going to be a difficult journey and ugly in many ways. All right, let's press the pause button. In my life, God has not told me where he's going to take me. Anyway, I haven't heard a voice on it. I will say, though, wherever he takes me, he rarely takes me from point A to point B in a more or less straight line. It's like this. I don't know. But my sense is I've got to take courage, because this journey that God is orchestrating in my life requires courage, because much of it is, I'd even say most of it is unknown to me. That's how the future works. I just think that's the way it is for all of us. Learning to lean upon the fact of the Lord's nearness and that he is in control. It's a big deal. See you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.